Hi, everybody. My name is Evan Radisic. I am the Executive Director of the Cloud Software Association. Thanks a lot for joining us for another SaaS Connect. Today with us, we have Fraser Davidson, CEO of Cyclr. He's joined by Daniel Twigg, his marketing manager. We're going to have a pretty interesting conversation about a hot topic that I think is I don't know. I think in everybody's mind. I think everybody's seems to be building out an ecosystem of integration partners, and there's a bit of a race to get everything connected. And obviously, I like to say that it's 2021, and there's way too much software out there, and customers are just demanding everything to be connected and seamless, which puts obviously pressure on the companies to get those things done. However, there's complexities with it, and then resources are scarce, and there's a few different approaches to getting this thing done. So we're going to try to have a discussion around, what are the options? What are the challenges? What's been done in the past? What's been the status quo? And what is the, quote unquote, new school of way of getting these kind of integration platforms out there and getting connected to some of the, I guess, players in your space. So Fraser, I'm gonna maybe just do a quick little intro on who you guys are, where you are, what the company is, and we'll kind of start getting into some questions and discussion. So everybody, if you have questions, post them in the comments. We'll try to get them answered as we go and try to keep this as casual and interactive as we can. So Fraser, why don't you tell us a little bit more about you guys?
Yeah, thanks, Evan. Hi, all. Good to meet you virtually, at least. So I'm Fraser, as Evan says. Thanks for the intro, Evan. I'm CEO of Cyclr, one of the co-founders. Cyclr has been in existence for 5 years now. As Evan says, quite rightly, we're in the cloud connector space, the integration space, trying to innovate within that area and have, as a result, an interesting perspective on what we've seen people do with APIs over certainly the last 5 years, if not before as well. This isn't a product pitch in any sense, so I'll keep it brief. We provide an embedded integration platform. Our clients are predominantly other software businesses, be that SaaS, be that traditional software, be they small or be they large. So we've got an interesting perspective on the ecosystem and how people have done things. And I'm looking forward to the conversation, Evan.
Daniel.
Hi, yeah, nice to meet everyone virtually. I'm Daniel. I've been with Cyclr for the last 5 years doing the marketing. And as part of Cyclr and the nature of working with lots of different businesses, we interact with a lot of different types of SaaS companies on different levels. So looking forward to kind of talking about that and the different ways we go about it and different styles companies have.
Awesome, thanks. So here I'll kind of like set the theme on this. Like, I used to be at a company called Proposify, and they had an API. It was an early stage company. I think we're at that time probably 80, 85 people. We had an API. We had some basic integrations done. This is probably now, I'm using this example because it's really kind of resonates with a lot of our members, but they had probably maybe 10 integration partners, and they were the basic stuff like, just moving client data from one end to the other, like it was HubSpot or it was QuickBooks or whatever. And they had an API that they built pretty early on in the company. Said, look, we need a basic open API that people can connect to. And it was very much a thing where it was like, okay, we know this thing's not perfect. We know it's only touching on a fraction of what we need, our partners to have, but we have something. And then they were like, okay, like, let's just, go out, get a few strategic ones that we know, like core, like our customers want, like our core group of customers want. And then the rest, we'll just put it out there and we'll just see, we'll just make it available. We'll kind of promote it a little bit here and there, and we'll just see what comes in. And then the level of complexity that brought was just incredible. Like everything from like managing people inquiring about it to like, hey, we're going to build this thing out. Like, can we like, talk to one of the engineers about some questions? And then you're trying to like route like questions to, and like your VP engineers, like, what are you doing to me? Like, I need this guy for something. So there's a lot of this like complexity to just having a Q&A with a partner like that. And then there's the layer of like getting it actually off the ground. And this would have been so, I want to say 4 years ago, 5 years ago, we're just around the time, probably within a year of when you guys took off. And the only option was like, we build it or they build it or we build it together. That was it. Like there was no like third or fourth like option. It was, and I think a lot of people are still thinking those are the only two options, and how do you, like, do I need to build out a team? Do I need to like carve off a section of the engineering team now as a partnership person? I'm managing engineering, like talent, like what is it? What's like, can you resonate with that kind of anxiety, and where do you see it now, or where is it going at least? I know that's like an all-encompassing question, but I just wanted to set the tone for what a lot of our members are thinking through. It's like that's the level of kind of anxiety that they're shuffling through. So
yeah, it's a killer question, Evan, and a big one. And I guess there are lots of different angles to come back. And I mean, my first thought is that what you described there resonates fundamentally. I mean, you can't be in software and SaaS without tackling integrations. You can't build an island, because whether you're small or large, every commercial conversation is likely to involve a how do I integrate your application to X, or how do I integrate your application to Y? So when we meet a vendor, they're kind of already thinking through all the things you've talked about. And there are merits actually to the strategies you've laid out there, absent things like, cloud connectors, because, you develop your API well, you offer out to your clients, then your clients can integrate with you. Very scalable way of doing things, because it's light touch. And if you're dev resource light, or you don't have the resources to do things, it's a sensible strategy to do that. At the other end, building native integrations, as we term them, i.e. when you sit down and your development team look at how they integrate your application with something else, is again a super way to do stuff, because it's high touch. It's, focusing on the customer relationship, the customer success, keeping the customer close, resolving their problem. The challenge is just scalability, because the more you do, the more successful you are, the more integrations you need. The more integrations you need, the more resource it consumes, and the more of a distraction it can become. And I think the large majority of businesses are somewhere on that spectrum between owning native integrations and then handing clients off, via their API, and effectively making it the customer's problem on how, your platform gets integrated into an ecosystem that they're running. And equally, I think the thing I'd add on top is not everybody has, deep pockets, the ability to run deep partnership programs and to invest heavily in this. So particularly young startups, mid-sized companies are looking at this saying, well, how do I juggle this best? And the interesting thing, I think, from our perspective is that everybody shares the same problem. Everybody sits there, looks at Salesforce and thinks, how do I integrate with Salesforce? How do I build that bridge? And then the next customer or the next, software business builds the same bridge, and the next software business builds the same bridge. So it's kind of repeatable in many sense. And when we've looked at that, we've thought, well, if you take that repeatable process, you can distill it down into a toolkit, then you can empower that organization with that toolkit to be more agile, to be more responsive, to take some of that kind of dev work off, off their list of things to do, to provide them with the ability to speed up their response and still, however, own the problem, own the customer relationship, own the solution for the clients and deliver out that way. So, in all honesty, Cyclr in some respects is not a magic wand, or an embedded iPass. Let's keep it away from Cyclr. An embedded iPass is not a magic wand, because an embedded iPass is still helping you deliver the integrations you could build yourself. It's just really focusing on the problem that you nailed, which is, well, how do you do that when you don't have deep resources and you've got other priorities you need to juggle? How can you be more agile? So it's a shared problem. Under-resourced development bandwidth, how do I resolve my clients' needs, and how do I become successful in a market that's changing all the time?
Yeah, I think you kind of nailed that piece. Like, honestly, it's, there's also the added complexity of like monetizing an integration, right? And I think a lot of people say, there's this scenario that kind of keeps resonating in my mind is, when I was in the role, was like, you get these inquiries from the sales team and say, hey, I'm working on this big deal. Here's an integration that they want for this thing to go through, and then you'll get 2 or 3 of them, and you start thinking like, okay, like I'm starting to see like pretty decent deals go down the drain. Like, this again, like there's software out there now to track a lot of this stuff as well, but like, so now you've got a business case that may or may not be true. Like you might have the integration, they still might not land, but nonetheless, like, we're thinking about it. And Daniel, I'd love to get your take on this from the marketing's perspective, is like, ability to kind of get a few integrations through the door without that enormous heavy lift, solve the challenge. So like, give them like, what are they looking to do with those 2 pieces of software? And then trying to figure out how can we monetize that? Like, so do we do co-marketing campaigns? Do we prove it out? Because if you can prove it out with like 2 or 3 or 1, then resource allocation becomes an easier ask to say, look, we did this with just bare bones and here's what's happening. Can we pour some fuel onto this? Like, what's your guys' approach? I'm sure you're getting those questions around that monetization, co-marketing piece of it when you get some of these quicker off the run, like quicker build off the runway integrations.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the instant advantage of having these integrations is the fact you're opening your audience up to so many different places. You're offering an added value that can help existing users of other platforms. So to be able to do that, and then if you can then do co-marketing with the company to expose your brand, expose your product, I mean, that's great. A great way to get exposure. But then to monetize that, that's a different thing. I mean, what you'll see with some companies is they'll use integrations as a lever up tiers. So if you wanted to start small, if you're on a basic plan, you get X number of types of integration, or if it's more premium products, you might see them go up. They'd have to go up the tiers to kind of access those. But to be able to show customers that you work well with other platforms, I think is an essential thing now. Like everyone has got integrations, and to be the ones providing them, it shows that you're kind of dedicated to the ecosystem. You're really adding that extra value, and whether as your product grows, as that goes, you can integrate with a wider range of products as well, and that just kind of expands your reach even more. Yeah,
I think monetize is an interesting word, actually, Evan. I think value is more the way I think about it, because we see a number of vendors and they think about integrations in a different way. And for many vendors, it's not about commercial success. It's more just about fundamental function within the platform or overcoming objections in the sale process. And I know that eventually translates to money, but their motivation might not be financial and offering a connectivity environment. It could be really about satisfying needs or showing scale or the ability to adapt in an agile way to what their customers need. Some, however, go to the other extreme. We have conversations saying, well, how can I charge for integrations? How can I then make money on top of this? Is this a chargeable event? So they go very literal on the interpretation of monetize. But when we're thinking about it, it really is about from a value perspective and saying, it's about delivering value to your organization. At the other end, it could be about cost saving, right? It could be about that CTO sat there looking at the size of the integration problem and thinking, I can't afford the resource to deliver this. And therefore, you can look at integration, say, by using a toolkit or amplifying your efforts somewhere, you might actually just save costs. And that therefore is value in a different way, or monetization. Okay, you're not spending money, but you're getting the value, you're delivering the service in an efficient way.
No, that's great. Thanks for that, Fraser. I think it's interesting because, I'm kind of reading through some of the questions and I'll kind of get from my audience and I'll kind of get to those. But, there's this anxiety that happens where, I'll read one and I'll kind of frame a question after that. But so I've got a question from, anonymous here. My product team wants to own everything and I'm going crazy. My CEO put it back on me to figure out. I don't have power, so I have to be persuasive. Customers are frustrated and partners are giving up on me. How do I navigate this? So I mean, this is a Resonate team. It's a theme. It's people are basically being handed down this like problem. It could be an opportunity, but it's usually a problem. It's like, this is happening, like figure it out, get a partner on board, get this fixed. And you're kind of left to figure it out. Like that you might get one resource or maybe half a resource to figure it out, at least validate it to say, look, here's what we need to do. Here's what's going to get us there. Here's what I need. How would you approach that problem? Fraser?
Yeah, anonymous asking that question, it's a common objection we see on the way through. Developers inherently want to own stuff, because that's what they're there to do. My development team want to own stuff. We say it day in, day out. And I think the key thing actually is to focus on the friction that ownership can bring with it, which has just been eloquently described in the question in some way, in that using a toolkit can help eliminate that friction, the friction between commercial and development. Commercial sell a deal, the deal involves an integration, commercial turn around to development, say we need this integration, and development teams quite rightly then go, great, but hang on a minute, we've got this sprint we're operating in, we've got this schedule of stuff we're already doing, we will take your integration, we're going to slot it in here. And then commercial inevitably, because commercial teams do that, go, that isn't going to work for us, this deal is now, we need it now. I can't say 3 weeks, 4 weeks, a month, 3 months, it's kind of got to be immediate. So one thing is about eliminating that friction between commercial and dev. The other side of it really is talking about ownership too, because a toolkit doesn't mean you're absolving yourself of ownership, right? When you use AWS or Azure to host your application, that's not you absolving yourself of your application environment. You're using a tool or a service that enables you to deliver what you want to do. You shouldn't be building a billing platform unless, of course, you're billing SaaS, because there's a toolkit out there to enable you to do your job better. And, working with techies, we are sensitive to that. It's about providing tools to enable them to have ownership, but just to be more efficient in their ownership in that regard. The other thing, the liberating thing, and not everybody adopts this yet, because this is free thinking in integration space, is that some of our clients look at it and say, should this actually be a developer role? Do you want your developers encumbered by rolling out integrations on a regular basis? Is integration not actually a client-facing problem or a client-facing proposition? Could it not be owned by customer success? Could it be owned by product? Could it be owned by, customer development? Whatever you want to call it, depends what side of the Atlantic you're on, I guess. And should therefore they be enabled with tools to deliver that. So there's no friction commercial dev, it's commercial to commercial friction, if you like. But the development team are absolutely and fundamentally there in support of that, initiative by managing and advising upon the ecosystem and being there for technical questions about delivery and not actually being responsible for the delivery itself.
Yeah, I love when that's well described. And I love when it comes down to this, because what you're describing there is a partnership person that has a role of a mini CEO, right? And I talk about this all the time where, really good SaaS partnership folks are wearing like a mini CEO hat where they're, they have to know the product. They have to know the product team, engineering, and what they're doing, how they're doing it, like, timelines, like sprints. They have to be connected with the sales team. Like what's, how far into the target are they? Are they, what's the end of the month look like?
Yeah, it's juggling, right? Yeah.
And then you have to be like, okay, like be the, politician to be like, okay, well, I need to get this through. So I got to get buy-in from this person. And then I got to be mindful of product because they're on that sprint that they're on. Oh, and sales team is going to definitely complain about this. So I can't bring it up this quarter. I have to bring it on. So like, I just think like partnership people in SaaS are like hugely underpaid for the good ones anyway, what they're doing, because you really do have to play that, like, you don't want to, piss anybody off, but like you also want to push things through, right? That kind of plays into this question from Kevin McFarlane. It's a little bit of a step back in terms of our conversation, but I want to make sure that we kind of touched on it. It's like, and the question is, when do companies build integrations themselves versus using an iPass? Now, like, is there a common tipping point that you guys see where, you'll talk to a client or you talk to a company and they're doing the status quo, building them out? And is there a common kind of tipping point where they say, look, this just makes sense, and here's the top 3 reasons that they say yes?
Yeah.
Like,
sorry, I'm chatting on this, and I'll let Daniel chat to say. But the answer actually that is, I don't think it's linear. I think my answer to that's no. There isn't a time when that happens, because our best clients, it's not that you start native and then you use an iPass and then you no longer do native anymore. It's not that you start native, you use an iPass, then you stop handing off clients to your API anymore. Actually, a great strategy is coherent, where you're constantly assessing the integration requests that you have coming through. Now, fundamentally, there are some integrations you should probably build that bridge yourself always, okay? And they're things that I would call kind of functionally critical integrations. They're fundamental to the performance of your application. a simple example might be you're developing a calendar SaaS application. 100% you should own that Google Calendar integration or the Office 365 integration or whatever it might be yourself natively. Equally, going to the other end of the spectrum, there are always going to be integrations that are too niche for you, or not many people are requesting, or, it's the long tail stuff, that old 80-20 rule. You can't develop every integration, even with an iPass. There's always going to be a line where you go, well, that's what our API is for. Use a third-party iPass, and there are great ones out there, Zapier, IFTTT, or Boomi or MuleSoft, if the client's at the higher end of the spectrum, that will achieve that integration and proffer the API out. But then there's the stuff that's in the middle, which is commercially critical integrations that are valuable to that commercial conversation, the monetization of the value we were talking about earlier. That's the kind of stuff that, is typically the territory of an embedded iPass vendor. Now, and a good embedded iPass vendor can do the whole scheme, right? But that doesn't mean they should do. And I think when we speak to our customers, the ones that are really on the ball are looking at how they move integrations between the different possibilities. That one there that we've been handing off via API, it's now a common request. Maybe there's a threshold, 20 clients, 30 clients have requested it. Maybe now that should be native and commercial. Then there could be another one that 50%, 80% of the client base is using. At that point, the consideration should be, well, should we be developing that natively rather than having an iPass? And I think there's an oscillation coming through. And we've got great customers who are thinking that. The one that springs to mind is Chargify as a client of ours. They think that way about their integration strategy, and it's admirable and it's right. So it's not you do one and then you do another, and that means you never go backwards or you never go forwards. It should be holistic, is my view.
Yeah, no, you kind of nailed it. And I think that's kind of what we're trying to get across is like, it's not, when I say new school of doing things, it's not necessarily that like, oh, building integration is just too old school and this is how it's being done. There's way more software out there now than there was 5 years ago and that there was 10 years ago, right? And it's exponentially. It's only going to get worse. So given that it's expanding at that rate, there's absolutely no way. Like, I mean, there's also, an IT global labor shortage, right? Like there's no, even if you were a large company, you can throw money at it. Like going forward, you're not going to be able to build out every single integration from scratch.
You know what, Evan, 100%. I mean, and people will laugh. I commonly am asked, what's your development roadmap for connectors? And my honest answer is I have no idea. I don't know what it is, because we work in 2-week sprints. We respond to what our customers need. It's ever changing, and it's perpetual. And if you ask me to predict what we're going to be building in November, I'm clueless. I can sense the direction we're heading in based upon requests, but really it's about being responsive to demand. So even in what we do, we're at that coalface. It's such a fast changing market. There's so many innovators coming in, categories that we hadn't heard of. When we started out doing what we're doing 3, 4, 5 years ago, we sat down, Daniel was part of that team. We wrote a roadmap, what are the killer connectors or cloud connectors people are going to want? That day is long gone now. You can't predict what's happening. And if you're a partner manager, I can't see how that's any different. You're going to know the fundamental heartbeat stuff you need for your application today. But next year, 2 years' time, 3 years' time, what are people going to demand of you? Who are going to be the upstarts coming through that have suddenly taken that whole sector and space that's tangential to you? Because integrations do tend to be in tangential areas. It's not your competitor. You can't predict it. It's such an interesting, environment to work in.
Yeah, no, you nailed it. I think it's it's obviously it's changing, but the fact remains is that you're going to have to build some of it. Like you say, you're going to have to build the core yourself because you're going to need to own it. And maybe a good 30% of customers use that tool. If 30% of customers use a tool, you probably should own that integration, right? Yeah, but if you have like 10 sales guys, or gals, inquiring about a specific integration or a specific customer that wants an integration, it's not enough to dedicate towards a team. But I think, to me, iPass makes an easy sense because you're like, okay, well, you can put the math together, say, look, if we get half of those, it's going to pay for this, but then we have that integration. We don't want to manage it because it's not a critical mass yet, but we're not saying no to it. So you're saying you're doing, and that's the thing. It's like, if you can't have more yeses than nos, you're going up, right?
But you can also be Machiavellian about it, right? And it doesn't have to be about the volume of integrations coming through. It can also be about the value of your client. Okay, so you can sit there and we're the same. You've got differing subscription levels running through your organization. And maybe you sit there and go, well, for a client of that stature, we'll do custom integrations, okay? And you can then use a toolkit to deliver that service, but you don't deliver or offer the service to everybody. So you might segment what you do integrations-wise by the commonality or the frequency of the request rather than the commonality of the request. Or you might do your strategy based upon the value of the client to you as an organization, be that financial or be that other assessment criteria.
That's an interesting point because I think what I see a lot is, especially kind of in the MarTech and kind of that agency space, you'll get, or even like sales tech, you'll get software companies that have a professional services division, right? That do, it could be a design service, consulting, some gap they've seen that gets them more deals closed than without it, right? So they call it professional services division, and it's kind of like a subset of their customer success. Do you and this is more or less an opinion, do you see a possibility of being such a, kind of adopting a similar model with the integration piece, especially on the iPass side, to say, look, this is a separate service that we offer. So it's like, hey, if you want this, here's the extra cost that it's going to be, but we're going to manage it for you so that it seamlessly integrates with what you're doing. And we will make sure that it happens instead of kind of handing it off to a third party. Have you seen any conversations around that front?
Sure. Jump in there. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a completely valid way to go about it. And having a toolkit to do that makes it a quicker and scalable method of being able to do these custom integrations. I mean, you look at some of the big SaaS companies around, they have their own ecosystems of consultants who will do these custom integrations for different customers. If a SaaS company can then also provide that as a service as well without having to use up the development resources as much as they would otherwise for doing it the traditional route, then it's a legitimate method of gaining new revenue streams, offering a deeper level of service to your customer. So you're going to make that relationship a lot stickier, and that's what you want at the end of the day. You need to have that close relationship with your customers, and if you're providing extra services that no one else is offering, then absolutely.
Yeah. Sorry, I was going to say we definitely have customers who do that. Clients. I mean, the ones that spring to mind for me are like Drive Social Media in the US, Austin Lawrence in the US. Both of them doing slightly different things. Drive is more in the marketing arena in terms of data. Austin Lawrence is more in the consultancy, working with clients to achieve results, and they use it with no visibility to their clients directly to deliver high quality services, manage data flows on their behalf, and in Drive's example in particular, add value around their own software application as well. Monetization and the value of that, is their prerogative in many respects, what they want to do.
Yeah, awesome. Here, I've got a question here that from the audience that I think we've touched on, but I just like the way that it's put together. Does it really mean you don't, quote unquote, own the integration? If you use iPass as a software developer, that seems like a silly argument. It would be like anything you don't own. It would be like saying you don't own your web because you use AWS. Can you comment? I mean, you kind of touched on that. It's if you're using Oracle or something. What's the distinction, right? When you do get that argument, hey, if we pass this on, we lose control. Is there an example you can draw from that would just alleviate that a little bit more? What does the day in the life of an iPass integration look like? Which part do you own? Which part do you not own? What do you control? What do you not control? Without getting into the back end tech side, but purely from if you were to have a 10-minute conversation with a CEO on that, and his product guy said or engineer said, we would lose control over this thing. We can't let it go because we lose control. What would you say?
I'd say there's a balanced argument to it, Evan, is the truth. And I think rather than losing control, I'd say there's a dependency, undoubtedly. But I think it's the same way there's a dependency on an AWS or a billing platform, or a chat platform. If it's a vital part of what you're doing, then you are slightly dependent upon it. And you've got to think about, well, what do I do in the scenarios where I no longer want to be dependent on this? And so again, when I chat to CTOs and CEOs about this, I'm saying, well, look, fundamentally, you own your API. And as I was saying earlier, Cyclr isn't a magic wand, or an embedded iPass is not a magic wand. You can replicate anything that is being done in an embedded iPass by yourself with more effort. And the key thing with a toolkit is it reduces the effort. That's the reason it exists. That's where the demand comes from, is that the effort is too high often to do it all directly. So you've got to look at that. And actually, when you think about strategy for integrations, you should think about dependencies too. Now, when we are thinking about that, we're not blind to it. So, there's an ability, for example, in our tools to export the workflow that you've created in a documented form, so that should you want to, you could export that workflow and rebuild it elsewhere or replicate it directly yourself to have the recipe for what you've put together. Now, there's no interoperability standard at the moment, which means you could export from us and then import it into somebody else and it would automatically happen and fire like that. This is too young an industry, embedded iPass, for that to actually be out there. But nevertheless, there's the ability and the reassurance to say, well, there is ownership of that. It's your workflow. Fundamentally, it's your API. It's your API, it's workflows you're building. You own the customer relationship. So you're thinking of this in the dependencies around the tools you're using to deliver it. Now, the benefits to doing that is that you can do 10 times more integrations, 10 times more, agile way, faster, more responsive. The downside to that is you're using tools to do it rather than building yourself. But it's a common argument. And I'm going back to the same examples, but you don't build the billing platform necessarily. You don't build the infrastructure from the ground up, even though you will have a dependency on those two, because it doesn't make sense to do it. Any good dev team probably could do that. Any good dev team could build a CRM. Any good dev team can build integrations. It's about efficiencies. So I think it's a great question to ask, and you have to consider it in the round when making a decision about using a toolkit.
Yeah, I think I've used the argument around, because I don't know why, and I love that you addressed the elephant in the room, is like, yeah, you have a dependency on it because, it's a platform that you guys own, you're building out on it, and, as long as you're a customer, you have it. But like, the same argument could be done with, like, if you use Slack in your organization, it's like, well, you're paying Slack, a monthly subscription fee that's quite high, but there's a value that you're getting in terms of efficiency, like creating channels, getting projects off the ground, like, eliminating email jar, all that stuff. And if you stop paying them, you lose all that. I mean, you can download it, and I'm assuming the same for you guys, download the kits, you still own all your data, all your stuff. You can go anywhere you want, but I think the idea is that you've recognized the value of that, right? So it's like, hey, we can mail out a message in like snail mail, or we can, message it, text message. Each of them has their own efficiencies, and, you can get like 10 text messages for every message. So clearly 10 more integrations for every one integration is 10 worth one for that subscription or whatever. Like but you have to address it, right? You have to talk about it.
I'll be super open back, actually, Evan, and say I think the dependency on something like an iPass is higher than a dependency on a Slack, because a Slack is a communications tool. It's not client-facing necessarily. It's fundamental to the business, but you could switch Slack off and with some effort turn on another messaging tool and then use that and pick it up. And your customers wouldn't necessarily be the wiser. I mean, the dependency on an iPass is in the realms of your AWS's dependency, your billing dependency, the tools you're using to do UI or UX or whatever it might be, or customer journeys. It's stuff where you have to think carefully about it, and you got to have a strategy for, how you're going to handle these and think about them rationally. Now, that's not me negating the benefits of it, but it's a balance thing. It really is. And
yeah, I think maybe you had a better example. You're right. You can turn off messaging and nothing blows up. You get less efficient in your day. An integration stops working, and 3,000 of your customers can't use it, or their deal falls through because they didn't have the client info that had to connect. That's a big deal, right? So it just cannot happen for the same reason your website cannot go down. But
that kind of stuff, I mean, that's in many ways the basics of a good embedded iPass vendor. I mean, I don't mean dependencies in that respect, because you run integrations through an embedded iPass, they should run. You can't have them not running, without something disastrous happening, like the third-party applications API is no longer receiving requests, whatever it might be. My dependency more, I think, is kind of, when I talk about it, is about medium-term strategic kind of stuff. thinking about, ownership and what you want to own and how you shift it through. And worst case scenario, something goes wrong with the vendor fundamentally, what do you do? How do you recover back from that position? And again, I think a good embedded iPass vendor will be thinking about that as well and offering tools out to make it possible for you to migrate and to shift, but it is a dependency at that level of kind of developer tools. Shifting from AWS to Azure is no mean feat, but it can be done. An embedded iPass shouldn't be at that level of kind of concern when you're thinking about it. But nevertheless, you would want to think about how you could exit out and then, rebuild or migrate somewhere else intelligently if you needed to.
Yeah, and I think just going through the motion, that's why this is really helpful for a lot of our members, is like you need to know what you need to be thinking through, right? So great, like you've addressed that. So when you do talk to your head of product and he does bring that up, you know that, hey, I've thought about it. Here's what I have to say about that. However, here's the benefits of that same flip side. You guys are bogged down. We have two, integrations that have been in the hopper for the last 6 months. We're just not getting these things out. And I get why. It has nothing, it's not a blame game. It's like, I understand it. However, this needs to happen and here's how we can do it. And I think the cons far outweigh, or the pros far outweigh the cons, right? And in a lot of cases, it might not. It might be like, the cons are just way too big. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. Nonetheless, you've gone through it and evaluated it.
It's the quid pro quo. It's that friction point earlier. On one side, there's friction because you might not be delivering integrations in an agile, fast way, and you're losing customers on that side. The other side is thinking about what you do in scenarios where you want to change your strategy or move integrations around and how you do that, and the compromises you're making as a result by not owning everything. But equally, I will say, just to make sure I give the balanced argument, the downside to owning everything is your ability to standardize it as well. So we do speak to clients who say, well, Bob built the Salesforce integration, and Frank built the NetSuite integration, and then Sheila built the one to QuickBooks or Xero. And then sadly, Frank left the business, and Bob and Sheila have had to pick up his work, but he's developed the integration differently to how they did it. And there are compromises within that ownership piece too, because if you're not standardizing your methodology for delivering integrations, you're treating each one almost as a custom project. Now, there'll be people out there listening going, but we do standardize. And absolutely, there are people out there who've got amazing rigors internally when they build stuff. They're hyper efficient at doing it and all that kind of thing. But it's not a luxury that every organization has, because it requires resource, it requires skills, it requires teams and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've heard, including companies that I've been part of, where they'll refer to a person as oh, he's or she's the integrations person. They're just amazing. Here's all the things they've been able to do, and then they leave. And now you're like, okay, great. We can get another talented person in there. There's going to be a time gap and then a ramp up and everything else, and they're never going to be that same person, right? That has happened time and time. You need to plan for that to 100% happen, every year and a half almost, just to be safe. And what happens when they leave, right? That's I think a benefit a lot of people overlook, is that having, again, the core ones that need to happen managed with the, product or engineering team that ownership has to be there. But for the other, 50, 60 integration partners, whatever you have, the larger number of the smaller, kind of still critical, but smaller ones, who's managing these things? Who's making sure that they're still connected and functioning and it's not breaking your system? To me, it makes a lot of sense to have a partner with you that can make sure that that is functioning the best way it can for the year you're in, right? And then just building an integration, not touching it for a year is also not an option. You need to be constantly revisiting these things, right?
You've got to have a system of control across the top. You've got to be able to monitor them. What's going on in your integrations? How are they performing? Has there been a deviation? Has there been something that's been a change? And breaking changes are not often API related. They can be data related. Somebody starts using the postcode field for telephone numbers, and then the third-party application at the other end decides that that doesn't work. Sorry, no go. And so that flow that was running before has now stopped running because of a behavioral change at the client end. You've got to have an eye on these things and know how to do it. And again, there are great businesses that do, but as that client base grows and the ecosystem grows, there's a responsibility to do those things too.
Yeah, it's a different story when there's I don't know, like 5 to 10 integration partners, and you have one person managing all 10 relationships, and you get a pulse on it, it's totally manageable. And I've been in that spot. But then when it gets over the 20, seems like where it's like, okay, like this is not, you need a team, you need to manage, and then you're being more reactive than like proactive. And you're missing opportunities too, because you're not going out. And Daniel, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Like, you're not being proactive about, like, okay, great, like the integration works, right? It's doing the thing that it needs to do. How can we get it in front of more customers? How can we make people aware? How can we do campaigns together to, maybe go through scenarios and case studies on how to use two products together? Some of the cool stuff that really gets the integration on a spotlight and share customers and knowledge between the two companies. It's pretty hard to get to that level of thinking when you're worried about, like, is this thing working?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you need that solid base to go off of anything. And then from the marketing point of view, it depends on who you're integrating with. Like, how receptive are they to do co-marketing? Have they got departments that are available to kind of engage with you more than anything? And if not, is it something you can do independently based on a customer's experience? So providing your own customer's case study, and they can talk about how using your service and integration has benefited them, and obviously use that for marketing collateral. But it is a tough one. You want to be able to advertise it as well as possible, ideally in conjunction with who you're integrating with, but it's not always possible. So you've kind of got to find ways, whether you're writing blog posts about it and then using the classic social to promote, and more developer and vendor specific channels. Perhaps if you can get involved in groups that are specific to a vertical market, you're saying, look, we did this. This has been a great success. This has added this value to our customer. It is possible. And it's not necessarily selling your product. You're saying, look, it is doable, and this is what is possible through providing these integrations. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways you could go about it, really.
No, that's great. I'm going to go through a couple of questions. Just be mindful here. We've got about 15 minutes left, but I just want to make sure we addressed a few of these things. We've got one here from Kevin. How does an iPass overlap or not with the SI partners? Does it cannibalize their services, integration, built-in support services?
Yeah.
Like, do you have an answer to that?
I do have an answer to that. Yeah, I mean, it depends on the vendor, okay? I mean, if I can only talk about ourselves, but we focus on providing a software toolkit. We do not provide services. Now, that doesn't absolve us of responsibility for technical support and training our clients up, but we don't build integration solutions. So does it cannibalize? Well, again, I'd say that's part of a strategic assessment by the client. I know clients that use iPass, but also still use systems integrators to deliver, managed services for them for specific customers, for example. I know systems integrators that use our toolkit actually as an efficient way to deliver their service, because we are concerned with providing a toolkit to them. And in the same way we can make a software vendor more agile, we can make a system integrator more agile. I think it's not a one nor the other. It's kind of a symbiotic ecosystem. It's down to, the fact that going back to earlier when I'm saying embedded iPass is not a singular strategy. You don't put everything onto it. It's the same with system integrators. You might find that actually what you want to do as a vendor is to offer your systems integrator partners the toolkit to deliver integration to your application, because you might not be able to, we call it, I might go down a rabbit hole here, stop me, Eben, but not all integrations are templatable, okay? And what I mean by that is they're not all standardized A to B, B to C, or whatever it might be that you can offer up with slight adaptation that meets every client's needs. Some software vendors are in such a sophisticated part of the market that integration is actually about sitting down with their clients and talking about automations or custom integrations that are going to be highly bespoke to their needs. Now, that software vendor could choose to deliver that service themselves and build those flows. Or they might actually say, well, here's the pre-built integration toolkit. Here is my partner, the systems integrator who's going to implement it. Okay, it's now linked into our system, but this then enables them to provide their service in a standardized and efficient way. So I don't think the things are mutually exclusive. I don't think there's a cannibalization. I think there's a an ecosystem that can work well together. And we certainly don't view ourselves as being competitive against SIs because we're providing tools to enable people to make choice.
No, I think that's well answered. Thanks. I've got a question here that I think is absolutely excellent. There are plenty of service providers, we're talking about system integrators, VARs, iPass, that can help bring an integration to life without your platform. One of the gaps I see is having a resource to provide end user customer support for the integration. Have you seen solutions that can fill this gap? It's a loaded question.
Yeah, I'm not sure I get the question entirely, Evan. So the resource gap there is what in terms of the manpower.
Having a resource is providing end user customer support for the integration. I mean, to me, that sounds more or less like, are you providing, or do you see anything out there that's providing more of a customer support function for that integration? Like, so the customer's not going to you or the vendor, or who are they going to say, hey, I think you thought this would happen. It's not. Here's what it's breaking this. I mean, it's a little bit of a, because you're sharing the integration. So technically both software companies are having responsibility, right? So who fixes, I mean, obviously if it's on one end, it's an easy solution, but if it's like, no, you guys are not solving the thing you thought you were solving. I don't know, that's kind of how I understood it.
I'll answer the question I think I've understood. I mean, an embedded iPass vendor provides a toolkit to the software company, but the embedded iPass vendor has no direct relationship with the end user deliberately because it's a toolkit. It's often white labeled, it's often embedded into a platform. That's the whole idea with it. So traditionally, it's the software vendor that's then dealing with the customers because that's the point. That's the kind of the ownership we were talking about earlier. The vendor owns the relationship. The vendor understands the customer. The vendor wants to have a direct dialogue with the customer and resolve their needs. So how do you unlock that? I mean, for me, that's almost outsourcing. That's where you're working with somebody, you've outsourced your integration services, and that might be a systems integrator, or it might be a third-party a third-party vendor managing the integrations on your behalf. It might be going back to the old school and saying, well, here's our API, go and use Zapier. And in the end, then it's Zapier that is dealing with the customer. And that's the point of friction as well. We haven't talked about it much today, but it's about owning that customer relationship. As soon as you've got somebody else dealing with your customer, fundamentally, you've got somebody else dealing with your customer. So that relationship has shifted away from you to whoever is dealing with that relationship. And now that's a positive choice you can make. But by not dealing with it yourself, you're pushing the problem elsewhere. And that comes with positives. That therefore means you've got no bottleneck in terms of resolving your client's integration requests, but it comes with negatives. That other party is then speaking to you and saying, hey, well, I know you love that CRM you're using there, but have you considered perhaps this other CRM over here? It's a risk you take with it. So, yeah, I mean, there are great partners out there that can take that burden of dealing with customers and their integration needs off your hands. But again, like all these things, you go in with open eyes on that, I think. An iPass vendor that's a toolkit shouldn't really be consulting with customers directly because, we provide tools, the software vendor builds the flows. So the person consulting on the flows and the integration flows should be the vendor themselves because, they're the ones formulating the solution and should be learning as well, from the client's response to how those integrations are working and the value it's adding to them.
Oh, that's awesome. I've got one more question here. This one's actually from Sunir. How does the maintenance cycle go as these partners kind of change? This started becoming a major albatross that ate too many engineering resources and limited the number of integration partners we could carry. How could Cyclr help with this issue?
Yeah. I think this is more of a historic issue, actually, with respect to Sunir and the question. And that, the early days of APIs, they changed a lot, and there were a lot of breaking changes that happened, and breaking changes then stopped integrations working. It was a big headache. I mean, in our experience, breaking changes to APIs happen, but less frequently than you'd think now, because vendors are aware of the importance of the API, the stability of the API, and the fact that every time they change their API fundamentally and it's not backward compatible, the main people that are impacted are their own clients, who suddenly can't do what they were doing before. So breaking changes, I guess, are less frequent. When they do happen, that is one of the roles of the embedded iPass vendor, is to be monitoring these APIs, looking for them, communicating, allowing for change. However, fundamentally, if a breaking change happens, what the embedded iPass vendor has to do is to communicate and say, this has happened, make the customer informed at the earliest possible opportunity so that they can then resolve it in some other fashion, if that's fundamental. But I say they are the exceptions rather than the rule. Actually, the changes these days I see are slightly different. It's that customer A wants the Salesforce integration to work in a certain way and map in a certain way. Customer B wants the integration to map in a slightly different way, and C and D and so forth. They've all got their own esoteric ways, and then they add in extra fields and new fields become available. It's about forward changes in many ways. And again, that's what the iPass vendor should be there for. A, the tools should be agile and responsive. You should be able to either automate that adaptation, or you should be able to quickly react on a services basis to resolve that adaptation. Equally, you should be there on call, to communicate with the client about how they can do extensions or value add to what they're doing. So, it is a fundamental thing, which is that a role of an embedded iPass vendor is to monitor APIs, to extend APIs, to adapt connectors, cloud connectors as the API ecosystem evolves, and to communicate that clearly, to their customers, such that they don't have to think about it.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly kind of what we're talking about here, right? It's you have your own partner in success, right? Like you guys are there to kind of, you're on the team, right? It's having a little bit of a closer pulse, so it's not coming directly, because usually by the time you start getting customer complaints, it's the same as any complaints. Like you have one complaint, that means like 30 other people have already had that trouble. By the time it gets to you, it's already a big issue. So, I mean, how much more connected are you guys? Is it as soon as something is going wrong, something's breaking, like you guys are on it, like, or not just you guys, but any kind of iPass solution, like how much more connected are you with that integration than say you would in a traditional manner?
So number one, we have the benefit of a dedicated team whose sole role is to build, manage, maintain, and monitor API connectivity. So that's a resource that software vendors don't have, is the luxury of somebody or a team sitting there and routinely going through this process. The second benefit is that we have visibility of the ecosystem. We can see integration flows running, and we can quickly spot changes that might have happened. Has something happened that we have not been aware of or hasn't been publicly communicated? You can see the break happening, and you can quickly get onto it because you've got visibility over hundreds of different software vendors using integrations, and you can see the performance happening. So, it gives a degree of insight that most software vendors would not be able to replicate because of the focus on that API ecosystem, looking for the changes, thinking about it, and benefiting from the experience. I mean, we sit here with 400 plus API connections. I think our largest client, from a volume perspective, maybe has 85, 90 odd different connectors they use. So our largest client uses 25% of our connectivity base. The majority of clients are using sub 50 connectors. So we, sitting here with visibility of 400 connectors, are seeing a lot of behavior. We're able to pick up on these things more rapidly than any vendor in isolation might necessarily be able to do.
Well, that's super interesting. Mostly because I'm thinking about, the amount of data you guys are getting in terms of usability. I know we've, in my past teams, we've talked about how can we use some of this data? How are people using, obviously you're thinking about that in terms of your own product, like how are people using feature sets and how are they using the product to solve their challenges, all that good stuff. But then when you get into like, how are they using this integration to solve their challenges, or how are they using combination of 3 or 4 different softwares to solve challenges? You guys have a very unique position where you're able to see like, oh, okay, like, there's one thing about using this product. So as a client coming to you, say, great, thank you, like, nice to meet you, we're going to do this for you. But now you've got the ability to really look at how people are using their product in conjunction with some of the other connectors. Do you guys share some of that insight into like, hey, like, have you guys thought about doing some co-marketing with these 3 software? Because like it seems like you guys are really solving a key need. Did you know that?
No, not as much as we should do. I mean, in the end, Evan, we tend to view each client and what they're doing as kind of private. It's discreet, it's under NDA. It's not for us to share behavior across. But that being said, I mean, what you triggered in me when you were speaking there is thinking about, a principle I have, which is that a good iPass vendor is not about A to B and B to C and C to D, because that's the simple stuff. Any good vendor should be able to do that. It's about the edge cases. It's about the learning that you've got through working with customers and seeing what they do at the edges. And then thinking about the utilities you need, or the functional connectors you can create to facilitate and ease those processes to make it easier to deliver things. Whether that, I won't go into the detail on what those utilities are, but suffice to say, it's not all about API to API connectivity. It's often about what happens in the middle of that flow to overcome errors, or to give the ability to concatenate data, or to scrutineer data before things move through, or to branch, or to overcome shortcomings in APIs. We see APIs where there's no concept of get new, for example. Now, an embedded iPass can create the concept of get new records. Instead of pulling all the records across last time, it should be able to compare the previous run with the current run, and then only pass through the differences. So, there are things that and that's a very basic, actually, to be fair, of an embedded iPass. It all should be able to do that. But, it's those learnings that then benefit the ecosystem as a whole, because by working across so many vendors, you're at the leading edge, really, of how people are tackling integrations. And when we see people repeating the same process over and over, that's the light bulb moment when you begin looking at, well, how can we ease that process and make that more easy to repeat by building a function into the platform to deliver that out?
No, that's awesome. That's a great answer. Okay, Fraser, so we got a couple minutes. I want to kind of close it off with, I think that it's kind of a collage of a few different questions around, and something we definitely touched on. What, there's definitely this hybrid model of, like we discussed, using, your own team, building it in-house, having an open API so people have some access to it, and then using iPass. Could you describe to me what you see as like a model that, I mean, we address the fact that it's changing, so take this with a grain of salt, but by middle of next year, like, what do you see as the status quo for a mid-sized SaaS company growing and building out, probably, 100, 150, 200 integrations? Who knows at that point? What is this hybrid model you envision, being?
It's a difficult question to answer, and let me try and answer the best way I can. I mean, I think it comes down to the 80-20 rule, right? In many regards. And depending upon the type of application you're building, the size of your integration ecosystem is going to differ. If you're in the marketing space, God, your integration challenge is enormous. There are hundreds of CRMs out there, hundreds of email marketing, platforms out there. So 80-20 rule might mean that, there are 200 applications that are valuable to 80% of your clients. And that's a big bite to go after. So you should be thinking about, can we build all these ourselves, or should we be using an embedded iPass kind of tool for amplification to resolve those needs? Because you've got a high volume problem. If you're in, and I can't think of a cracking example to give on this, but if you're in a different category where the integration requirements are much narrower, let's say you're in veterinary practice, SaaS application development, and really out there are only 10 applications, that your customers are ever going to want to, integrate with, 10 integrations are going to resolve the need of 80% of your clients. At that point, you might be thinking, well, actually, we should just go direct and build these things. The size of the problem is so much smaller, because when you're looking at what you're going to do with embedded iPass, it is today's problem, but it's also, and you've touched on it a few times, Evan, it's tomorrow's problem and next year's problem. And you're looking at it and saying, what's our direction of travel? If you're only ever going to need 10 integrations, you might question, do I need an embedded iPass for that? We can probably control that. That's manageable. But if you're high velocity, or you're going into a market that's got high integration needs because you're in that marketing space, Christ, the size of your problem is enormous. And at that point in time, you want to be thinking, well, I should be doing that. So I don't think there is one answer to that. I mean, I think...
No, I think you just gave it. I think that's what it is. It's like, I think you're going to need to think about where you're going and how big your problem is. I think what we try to accomplish with these SaaS Connect webinars is really give some insight into our members to say, look, this is the stuff you should be thinking about, right? And if you had one direction you were kind of leaning towards, and you're getting friction on that, well, here's another perspective. So hopefully we added a little bit of that perspective in your guys' lives. But Fraser, thanks a lot for coming on board. Daniel, thanks a lot for your perspective as well.
Thank you.
I think it was a great conversation. Both of these gentlemen are in the Slack group, so if you do have questions that you didn't get answered, post them in there. We'll try to get them answered as soon as we can. And for those of you that didn't join us live, this will be a podcast, so you're probably listening to this on your way to work, hopefully. So awesome. Thanks a lot again for joining us, and we'll see you again soon.
Pleasure. Thank you, Evan.
Thanks very much, Evan.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.